Hey everyone, are you ready for another badass 392 build video? Well, that's exactly what you're getting in this one, so let's go take a look. Hey everybody, it's Bubba with X's 4x4, where we build badass 4x4s, and we've built another really sweet badass 392. The kind where we pretty much take everything about it except the drivetrain and change it. When we do something like that, we use a lot of different parts. And even though you may not do the exact same thing where you build the exact same Jeep, you may get an opportunity to see a lot of different parts on this type of build, and it give you some ideas for yours. So that's why I like making these videos. It doesn't mean I necessarily think you guys are gonna build one exactly like it, but you might see something that catches your eye. So let's start in the very front as usual. So the guy that owns this Jeep, he's gonna be over the moon over this Jeep. I mean, he already is. I tell you what, it really is awesome to build Jeeps for those kind of customers that are it just blows their mind when they show up and they see it and their dreams come true. And Clayton's definitely one of those guys. He's a very special customer and we can't wait. I have a feeling we're gonna be doing even more to this Jeep, which is crazy, but I think we're gonna do at least one more thing to this Jeep. But let's go ahead and get started and show you what we have done so far. There will be another video coming out soon enough on specifically just on this bumper right here. This is a new bumper from EVO Manufacturing called the KSPEC bumper. It's sort of similar in utility to the quarter pounder, but this is more high clearance than the quarter pounder bumper. I don't know if it's stronger, but it's definitely a more high clearance. This is a frame chomp bumper, kind of like the MotoBilt Tomahawk bumper, but EVO put their own style on it. Clayton really liked this bumper, and that's the one he wanted to put on here. So that's what he's got. It's really nice, sits back a little bit closer in on the Jeep, gives us some good clearance here after we cut the frame and mounted it. There is a skid plate right here, or a bash plate, whatever you want to call it, that you can take out. Gives you easy access to mount the winch. And that's been an issue. That's an issue on a lot of different bumpers we install, where it's kind of hard to get in there and secure all the hardware tight and correctly on the winch. But on this bumper, it gives us lots of room to work when you take that plate off. It's also got some nice light attachments on it that you can buy separately if you want to run something like these Baja Design LP4s. They bolt on to the side through the same mounting bolts that the bumper uses. And it gives you a really convenient place to mount lights. And then we added the Warn EVO VR 10S. Yeah, it's not the most prestigious winch, but it's what he wanted. And so that's what we sold him. It's a Warn winch, super reliable, very cost-effective winch. It mounts really nicely to the KSPEC bumper. I'm gonna walk around the outside of the Jeep before we talk about what's underneath the Jeep as far as the axles and steering go. So let's start over here. We did a fender chop. This is the Quake LED fender chop. I like these a lot. I like the smoke. I don't like the clear, I like the smoke ones. That gives us plenty of room to run the Jeep a little bit lower on these coilovers with 40-inch tires. Otherwise, if we had full fenders in there, we'd have to probably raise the Jeep up a little bit and bump stop it a little bit earlier. But in this case, it gives us the most clearance and most articulation, so I like that. You could switch to something like a tube fender maybe and gain a little bit more articulation up travel, but it doesn't look as good. I really like the look of the factory fenders on these, especially the 392s. I don't like to mess with them too much on the styling. These Quake LEDs just do a good job of allowing us to do that. Moving back, he originally wanted EVO weld-on sliders. We couldn't do that. I'll go back to that in a minute. We had to go with like a boat side type of step rock slider, and so we chose the MotoBilt. I really like the MotoBilts. It was either these, or use the Genrights. Actually, he didn't like the way the Genright terminated right there at the end of the fender. And when he brought that to my attention, I was like, yeah, I don't like that either. So we started looking around, and I knew MotoBilt made a really nice one, and that's what we ended up going with. He liked it too. I like it because it tapers right here and on the backside. I think, in my opinion, that's a little bit better styling than the Genrights, although I do like the Genrights. I like the aluminum. These are gonna be steel. Cheaper, little bit better styling in my opinion than the Genrights, and definitely strong. They're steel. This is separate, obviously two different colors, but the rocker panel here is separate from the step part, but that mounts into the body, and then the actual boat side right here mounts using the body mount bolts. Those captured underneath, and then on the top it mounts into that rocker panel. We chose to go with a color match here, as close as you can with powder coat for the rocker panel, and then we powder coated the step portion black, because more than likely this guy's going to be using that, and when he wants to touch up, it's just easier to touch up black than it is white. So you can get in there with any kind of satin, you know, touch-up pen or spray paint or something like that, and he can touch that up as he goes. Moving back a little bit more MotoBilt. In fact, we used a lot of MotoBilt on the exterior surprised we didn't use the MotoBilt on the front bumper, but he liked the KSPEC bumper over the Tomahawk. So we got the MotoBilt corner armor around here. I like this. We're not getting too aggressive on the body to do these high clearance lights for MotoBilt. I really like, this is the first time I've seen them on a Jeep first time we've installed them on a Jeep, and I really, really like it. Now he went with white here. If it was mine, I probably would have done amber for chase lights, but we used a Baja Designs S2 mounts inside this right here, and I like that, but I probably would have went with amber for, you know, desert stuff, but it's not as bright, and that's probably why Clayton wanted to go with white. It's just so when we put it reverse, it'll definitely light up the world back there. So MotoBilt corner armor, MotoBilt high clearance taillight. Again, I really like these. They look great. We had them painted to match the body. And also down here, this MotoBilt lower corner armor. This is the first time we've actually installed it on a customer's JLU. Very nice. Again, MotoBilt makes amazing products. I love their products. Their tire carrier, if you've watched any of our videos in the past where we do like a tailgate mounted style tire carrier, you're gonna see this one all the time. We just really like the way MotoBilt did it, more so because of the way the license plate and rear camera mount to that tire carrier. So down here, we also have the MotoBilt Micro Series rear bumper. That's gonna give us a lot of clearance back here. So if he's out rock crawling, he's not gonna be smashing his factory bumper or, you know, any other kind of bumper aftermarket bumper. This is gonna be a very minimal bumper, but it's also gonna retain the backup sensors. So that, I mean, it kind of captures everything that we need to do. We maintain the factory functions of the backup sensors, but we're getting a lot of clearance out of that rear bumper, and we're protecting the frame as much as we can back here. On the MotoBilt tire carriers, you can see right here, they have a great, this is my favorite part of this, because I like to think that of all the tire carrier options out there, if I got to change this thing in the middle of the night somewhere on the side of the road, yes, I'm still gonna have to get in there and use a wrench to get those bolts loose, but it in my opinion, it gives us a lot of room to do that. Gives us a great place to mount that license plate, the rear view camera, that all mounts up nice and neat. The body match painted those too, so it kind of blended as much as it can back there. Looks great. Wheel and tire combo, Rhino forged V-locks from Raceline. We powder coated the rings gold. Again, you've seen us do this on a couple of 392s. Those guys really like to keep the gold accents in play, and so we did that again here. And then again, Nitto 40-inch trail grapplers, because if you're gonna run a 40-inch tire, why wouldn't you run a Nitto trail grappler? I've had such great luck running all Nittos on all my stuff. My customers never complain. They run Nittos on pretty much everything we sell. We get a few different brands in now and then, but for the most part, we sell and install Nittos a lot, and they're just super reliable. They're a great tire. They wear well. They're not super expensive. The main thing is, like, I rarely, knock on wood, get flats with my Nittos. We're gonna keep pushing those things as long as we can. Interior wise, there's not a whole lot going on in the interior, but there's a great product we like, our customers love. Unfortunately, they don't give us any kind of dealer deal to sell their product, but hey, when somebody makes a product that is that good, I'd rather give my customers, you know, the best product I can, even if it means I'm not gonna make any money selling on the product. I mean, I make money installing it, but not selling it. And I believe that these guys are Canadian, right?
Yes.
Yeah, anyways, it's called the Kraken system. I think we may have talked about it in some other videos, but it's basically one of the few companies that make a compressor mount for the 392 that goes under the passenger seat. So we don't have to worry about tearing up, you know, the back and losing cargo area in the back of the Jeep to mount an air compressor. We don't have to mount it under the hood anywhere. It mounts underneath the seat. And the reason I like to do that, I like to mount these compressors on the interior, not the exterior. It just, for the life of the compressor, you know, it's gonna stay clean underneath there. It's gonna be pulling in clean air when we're airing up our tires and stuff like that. So what's really cool though is you got a mount on both sides of the Jeep underneath the seat. But you just plug in the hose right there. You can air up both sides. It's a cool setup. I like the Kraken. I'm gonna grab the forklift and we'll pick up this tire right here and we'll start talking about what's underneath, because that's where the good stuff's at. So let's start. We've covered the bumper. Now you get a better look down here. It's like I said, it's very high clearance. Eliminated the factory sway bar. Yeah, it was a Rubicon sway bar. You know, you could disconnect it and all that, but customer wanted something better. And so we went with the off-road only sway bar, which is kind of similar. I like it sometimes better than like an anti-rock, And so if you're not familiar with the off-road only sway bar, it's a dual rate sway bar. So it's got a very stiff rate for highway use. So you're not just flopping around out there, especially on a Jeep like this. You know, it's got 40s on it, sitting up on coilovers. Center of gravity's changed quite a bit. It's got a highway rate that's very stiff. Then over here, you got this switch mechanism here, this latch. You go back and forth. That disconnects from this other, it disconnects both sides basically, and makes them independent of each other, but not quite, because they're still connected. Both sides are still connected through a smaller torsion bar through the center of this one, much like an anti-rock sway bar. So it's basically the same thing as an anti-rock, but also gives you the street performance of a factory sway bar that's not disconnected. So I really like the off-road only sway lock, because I don't necessarily want to be as loose on the highway as I am off-road like I would be with an anti-rock. So they're great for that. Also, that's the manual latch. You can add an air latch to it. I think we've done one like that. And most people, we try and encourage them to stick with the manuals, just because the more analog you are about things, it just seems more reliable down the road. Onto our steering, we kept the chromoly tie rod that came with the Currie Platinum axles, which we'll go over in a minute. So we didn't have to change that, but we did change the drag link out to a Synergy Manufacturing drag link. We also changed out to a Synergy Manufacturing track bar. We do that a lot. We use a lot of Synergy parts for steering components because they've just been flat out reliable over the years. There's been only a couple instances that weren't even their fault. It's more of just a materials defect part. Everything else that we've had from Synergy over the years has been very, very reliable and dependable. So that's what we stick with. It just works, you know, and there's a lot of guys out there that make tie rods and their steering components, and sometimes we use them. They're good too, but for the most part, we like Synergy. It just works. Also, to help us turn those 40-inch tires, we did add the PSC Ram Assist to this. And this guy's gonna use this Jeep. So he definitely, with the 40s, off-road, locked up, he's gonna need Ram Assist. And so we incorporated that into the build too. As usual, we ran the hydraulic, the lines for it around and up the track bar, not over or underneath it. That's something that we've changed over the years. It just is, it adds a little cost because we have to change out to some different hoses than what's supplied with PSC. But it's just the right way to do it. I mean, it keeps the hoses out of the way. They never get pinched. It's all about reliability and dependability on this stuff. So that's what we do. All right, so here's something a lot of you haven't seen. Most of you have not seen this kit yet, but this is the Synergy Manufacturing high clearance long arm kit. I wouldn't say they're late to the game. Synergy is not always first to market. In fact, I don't think they're ever first to the market. It's taken them a few years to develop this. They did a great job. I mean, you can see this thing's got a lot of flex. We powder coated the arms gold. The customer wanted to match the trim of the 392, so that's what we did. The reason why we had to go with this style of a slider, because everything that we wanted to do, they wanted to weld in back here, and their next location was a couple of mounting locations for the weld-on sliders, and it just wasn't going to work with these brackets. So that's why we went with these, because we just had to clearance out one little part of these MotoBilt sliders, or both sides, to give us clearance for the long arm brackets on the rear. But that's ultimately why you were seeing these instead of some weld-on sliders on this build, is because of that. But there's no reason why these won't hold up as well as some weld-on rock sliders. So I'm excited to see this guy get out and use it. But it's a great kit. Obviously, I mean, we're bumped out all the way on the front right now and on the driver rear corner. So this thing is dialed in pretty well. Also, I forgot to mention this earlier. We are using the EVO Manufacturing inner fender liners. We're using an EVO coilover kit on this, as you've seen in many of our videos. So we went with those on the front because their inner liners just wrap around their coilover bracket and the coilovers themselves very well. Very clean, so that's why we chose to go with those instead of a different brand. You're also going to notice on all the reservoirs, these are not King reservoirs, these are the eClick reservoirs. You've seen us talk about this before. If you haven't, we're going to talk about it now. These coilovers, I don't think they came with the adjusters because we didn't spec that in the order because we knew we were going to take them off. So we got with SDI eClick, and we got the JOU kit that they make specifically for the jail. And we retrofitted the eClick reservoirs on here, and actually the controls for the eClick are plugged into the OBD2 port. So what this is doing, for those that don't know what eClick does, It's a lot like Fox live valve. If you're familiar with live valve, which is on the Ford Raptors, all the Raptors, it's basically adjusting the shock in real time as you're driving it. And it also has different ways to set up the shocks from the control, depending on how much weight you're going to be running, whether you're running on rock trails, desert, highway. This does have the Pro mode in it. So it's going to allow you to set your shocks up for whatever driving conditions you're going to be in, all from the driver's seat, okay? And it's really cool. I mean, you can test it. You can go in, you can deep dive into turns really hard, and you'll see this thing on the pad. You'll feel it and you'll see it on the pad, but it's going to be adjusting the shocks as you drive it. No more of this getting out and turning knobs back here and you know, figuring out where your adjusters need to be for whatever terrain you're going to be tackling. Now the shocks are going to be adjusting themselves on the fly, and that's amazing. That's awesome. And you're also going to notice that we have a skid plate back here. Well, that's part of the entire skid plate system from Next Venture Motorsports, all the way from the oil pan on the engine to the exhaust. We are completely protected underneath this Jeep with aluminum skid plates underneath, with UHMW bolted to them. I like the UHMW because if you've ever seen skid plates, you know, you've ran skid plates and you've actually used them off-road, they get the shit kicked out of them. I mean, if you're really using that Jeep off-road, you're gonna beat the hell out of your skid plates. At some point, you're gonna go try and take them off to do some maintenance underneath there, and they're never gonna go back the way they were. And that's because we're going skid plate on rock contact direct. There's nothing in between. And they just get chewed up and beat up and bent, and you know, the UHMW may not keep them from getting bent, but it's gonna keep them from getting chewed up underneath there and getting some gnarly gashes in them. And basically, it's kind of like cutting board material, for lack of any better explanation. But it's going to protect the skid plate. It's going to actually let you slide over stuff a little bit easier, because if you imagine a rock getting caught into the metal of the skid plate, sometimes they gouge in and get kind of hung up and they just tear, and they just really destroy the skid plates underneath, which that's what skid plates are for, right? We want them to take a brunt of the abuse. But adding another layer of protection with the UHMW, your skid plate should last the life of the Jeep. You may need to change out the UHMW now and then, but that's better than having to replace the entire skid plate system. So anyways, let me talk some more about the skid around the exhaust. Why is the skid plate around the exhaust so important? Well, that's because these dumb little exhaust tips right here, if you care about the ones that Jeep put on there, they're actually quite expensive. Like, each one is well over a few $100s each. Believe it or not, just from that little piece right there, that's like 12 inches of exhaust tubing. We've actually had guys take their 392s out to Utah before they could get in for the build, and had us replace these tips. And I mean, it was expensive, man. It was a couple $1,000s to replace all 4 of them. So why not put a few $100s towards some skid plates to protect them? And they work, man. I think we did them on Zeus or one of the other 392 builds where the guys really use them, and it flat out worked. I mean, they took some hard hits back here. They didn't deform. They didn't get in and mess up the exhaust. So this is definitely a must if you guys are going to be running these 392s on the trails and you want to protect that exhaust. I promise you're not going to lose any ground clearance back here any more than you, I mean, there's maybe, I'm feeling back here, there's maybe 3/4 of an inch between that exhaust tip and the skid. So well worth the price of admission for the skid plates to protect all this stuff, because these are really nice Jeeps, and there's no reason not to. If you're gonna be doing this type of off-roading with them, there's no reason why you shouldn't spend the money on these skid plates to protect these things underneath. I mean, even if you don't have a 392, if you have a V6 or whatever, you know, spend the money, man, protect these things, because even if you don't appreciate it, I promise whoever works on your Jeep does. This is the first time we've installed the Synergy long arm kit. In fact, when we asked them about the 392, they weren't even sure it would work. They think they designed it around the 3.6. I don't think we had any issues installing this long arm kit on there. And like I said, as you can see, it's got plenty of travel on this thing. It's crazy. I mean, and look at, they're doing some cool stuff. I think they're coming out with a Super Duty axle long arm kit where you don't even have to cut the brackets off the Super Duty axles anymore. You just bolt onto the radius arm mounts in there and get your brackets welded on. So Synergy's doing some great stuff. Pay attention to them. I like these mounts. They're very robust. By the way, these brackets did not weld in. These are all bolted in. Okay, so that's a little bit different. You're used to seeing us install like an EVO high clearance long arm kit, great kit. It welds in. These actually bolt in. Different strokes for different folks. Some people like it, some people don't. Axles, oh my God, we need to talk about the axles, sorry. Yes, one of the most important components of this entire build are the axles themselves. So let's go back to the front. All right, let's talk about one of the key components of this build, and that's the axles. These are gonna be the Currie Platinum axles. These were designed by Currie specifically for the factory 392 Wranglers. They are gonna be front and rear, high pinion 70s. That means they've got 10.5-inch ring gears, 35 spline front, 40 spline rears. Just beast of axles on these things. They've got massive brakes on them. I mean, these things were made to stop a 392, and they were made to be able to rock crawl with a 392 and not have any issues. So we're really excited. We love installing these. These are badass axles. I mean, they're just sexy as hell. Also, to run these axles, he had to swap out the factory 392 transfer case and install an Atlas. No issues whatsoever with this much power and this much tire and this much axle off-road. He's really no issues with the transfer case at all. I think that we pretty much built this guy one of the most bulletproof rigs. I'm looking forward to seeing Clayton get this thing out on the trails and just beat the snot out of it, because I know he's going to. What's funny about him, this is not his only 392. This is the, I love messing with Jeep about this. This is the first final edition. So he's one of those guys, he went out, he thought he was gonna have the last one, he buys a final edition, and then guess what? Jeep says, no, we're gonna make a final edition again next year. So he bought another one, put it in his barn and threw a tarp over it. He's covering it up. He's not gonna mess with it. But he figured, hey, if I've already got one, I'm gonna go ahead and build it. So that's what ended up being with this, and he's gonna take it out and use it, and I can't wait to see it. I mean, it's always fun to build something like this for customers and see them actually go out and use it, and not just drive it to Starbucks and back. So imagine we'll see some content from Clayton soon. And if you guys are interested in a build like this, make sure you get on the phone, get in the emails so you can get on the schedule and we can build you something like this. Don't forget to click and subscribe, and for more videos on off-roading and other cool stuff, click here. Ryan has instructed me that my crotch and my jeans is blown out, so I'm trying to keep my leg crossed.